In this episode's movie, a young law enforcement officer gets sent undercover by his mentor into a gang of adrenaline junkie thieves, falls in love with a woman attached to the leader of the gang, and then eventually lets the leader go. We're talking about, of course, The Fast and the Furious. Except we're not. We're talking about Point Break.
Adios, amigo!
Only one man is crazy enough to pull a stunt like this. Only one man is crazy enough to go after it.
You pull the cord!
Patrick Swayze.
Now you pull it! 6 seconds!
Keanu Reeves.
Pull it!
Point Break. Rated R. Starts Friday.
1991's Point Break. Guys, this is one of the best action movies ever made. Definitely one of the best action movies of the 90s. So one of the key things about this movie is it really turns the tide from 80s action heroes to 90s action heroes. You know, in the 80s, you had all your action heroes like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, Jean-Claude Van Damme, even Bruce Willis were like kind of these middle-aged guys or older guys who were experts in their field, you know, who whipped off one-liners, and guys like, you know, Dutch in Predator, Rambo, Jean-Claude Van Damme's Chuck Norris, J.J. McQuaid. This is a switch. This is like these newer kind of, they're younger, they're not quite as competent, they're not, you know, totally built on machismo, and they're a little bit smarter, and they look at things a little more cerebrally. It's a kind of a different kind of action movie that we're getting in the 90s versus what we got throughout the 80s. And this is really, we're kind of really on the cusp of this. We're going to talk about in the production the fact that this movie and Terminator 2 are basically being filmed at the same time. Terminator 2 is probably one of the last great 80s type action movies, and you know, this is kind of the first of the new generation of action movies that we got in the 90s. And it's really interesting that they're kind of coming out at the same time, that it's a husband and wife who are doing them. We'll talk about that. And, you know, we're seeing a big change in what is going to come from action movies that's going to be kind of a bit long-lasting. And, yeah, I know now we've got kind of these throwbacks into, like, the 80s action movie tropes in film series like Expendables or Red, both of which are very, I think, aware of the joke. Especially Expendables. It knows exactly what it's doing. It's in on it, and it makes no bones about it. But this film is really setting the tone for what a new generation of action films are going to be. So, how did we get here? So, this all started back in the mid-'80s when a screenwriter named Peter Iliff was reading an article. It was a newspaper article about how Los Angeles was the bank robbery capital of the United States. Iliff also had been taking surfing lessons, and so he came up with this idea of surfing bank robbers. Iliff known for writing things like Patriot Games, Varsity Blues, and so he started working on a treatment which came to the attention of some producers. He worked on it with Rick King, who was another writer known for Killing Time, Kickboxer 3. It got kicked around a little bit in Hollywood for most of the late 80s. It wound up at Columbia Pictures. At that point, it was being called Johnny Utah. Ridley Scott was involved with it in the development of it and was kind of slated to direct it. There were people being kicked around like Charlie Sheen, Matthew Broderick to play Johnny Utah, Johnny Depp, Val Kilmer. Columbia was going through some financial difficulties at the time. There was a big shakeup there. This film wound up getting over to James Cameron. Columbia Pictures at the time, I think, was part of Sony. Coca-Cola Company was involved with it. It was just a big, like a corporate mess. But eventually this film wound up getting to James Cameron over at Fox. Cameron was looking to produce this movie. He was, at the time, was married to Katheryn Bigelow, who had just finished doing Blue Steel, and he was looking for her next project. He was also developing Terminator 2 at the time. And so he put her forth as the director of this film. Cameron did a bunch of rewrites on this, uncredited. The screenplay credit is solely to Peter Iliff. Cameron says he came up with the idea of the ex-presidents. Iliff said he had come up with the idea of the ex-presidents before Cameron even got involved. Who knows? Probably a little bit of both is true. The studio or the producers, they didn't really like the title Johnny Utah because it didn't really tell anything about the movie. They were really leaning into the surfing aspect of it because no one had really done they'd done bank robbing movies, obviously, but they hadn't done a surfing movie. So they were looking for something that was kind of a little bit more into that. For a while there, it was called Riders on the Storm after the Doors song, which again didn't really have a lot to do with surfing. So eventually right about the time that Swayze came on, they had settled on Point Break. Keanu Reeves had come on just a little bit before. It was still called Johnny Utah when he came on. They actually wound up not even changing the name officially until the film was in production. So they wound up giving surfing lessons to Keanu Reeves, to Patrick Swayze, and to Lori Petty. Of the three of them, Patrick Swayze had surfed a couple of times. Keanu Reeves had never surfed, and Lori Petty had never even seen the ocean, or never even been in the ocean. So they set the three of them up with Dennis Jarvis, who is a professional surfer out on Hawaii, and they all took surfing lessons. Keanu especially took to it right away. In fact, apparently he still surfs. They also gave them skydiving lessons for Swayze and Keanu Reeves. Swayze's one of these guys. He's like Tom Cruise. Like, he insisted on doing his own stunts. He wanted to be 100% in. He broke like 4 ribs surfing for the film. He did, I think, 55 skydives for the film, to the point where the studio had to basically tell the producers, look, we're going to shut this thing down if you don't get Swayze to stop jumping out of airplanes, because they were worried that he was going to injure himself. So he's just kind of a nut like that. They shot the film in Malibu, Manhattan Beach, Santa Monica, Venice, in California. There was some that was shot in Oregon. There was some that were shot at Lake Powell in Utah. Specifically, the scene that was supposed to, at the end of the film, that was supposed to take place in Australia, they filmed in Oregon at a place called Cannon Beach. So let's get right into it. So the movie opens up and we meet Johnny Utah, former Ohio State quarterback and current FBI agent.
Special Agent John Utah, day number 1 in L.A. Welcome aboard. You're going over your personnel records. Very impressive.
Thank you.
You may very well have been in the top 2% of your class at Quantico, but quite frankly, son, out here you have exactly 0 hours of experience in the field. You know nothing. In fact, you know less than nothing. If you even knew that you knew nothing, that'd be something, but you don't.
Yes, he is being onboarded into the Los Angeles field office of the FBI, and we have his boss, Assistant Director Ben Harp, who's played by John McGinley, who is a 80s staple. And these two guys are not getting along. So let's talk about Keanu Reeves for a little bit. This is a guy who, at the point this movie comes out, he's basically known for being like the whoa kid, mainly because of the success of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which came out in 1989. Also, his role of Todd in Parenthood was fairly similar to that. He had done some other stuff. I mean, he'd been in a half dozen movies before, played a French aristocrat in Dangerous Liaisons. He had done, he was a hockey player in Youngblood. He had done a couple of other small parts, bunch of TV roles throughout the late 80s. This is really kind of his first, let's call it, dramatic lead in a movie. And he's playing Johnny Utah, in his words, kind of like a control freak. And one of the reasons that Johnny Utah gets obsessed with surfing is because the ocean is something that he can't control, and that drives him crazy. He is not a particularly likable character. I wouldn't even necessarily call him the hero of this film, although he's certainly the protagonist. And him and Harp are definitely not getting along. Harp goes on to explain that Los Angeles is the bank robbing capital of the world, which is kind of the impetus for the entire story.
This is us. Bank robbery. And you are now in the bank robbery capital of the world.
1,322 last year in L.A. County, up 26% from the year before.
That's correct. And we nailed it.
And then Johnny Utah, I mean, this dude is like really like a smart aleck. For a, he's like mouthing off to his new boss. And Ben Harper's not really having any of it.
Hey, you're a real Blue Flame special, aren't you, son? Young, dumb, and full of cum.
I know. What I don't know is how you got yourself assigned out here to Los Angeles with us.
So he gets introduced to his partner, Angelo Pappas, played by Gary Busey. Gary Busey probably at this point best known for his Oscar-nominated turn in the Buddy Holly story in 1978, but also for his role as Mr. Joshua in Lethal Weapon in 1987. Been in a bunch of other stuff, Stars Born, Hider of the House, Predator 2, which is not a particularly great movie. And he is Angelo Pappas, who is kind of the older mentor figure, we talked about that earlier, who is going to kind of lead Johnny along on this quest to find these bank robbers. Guy's kind of treated as a joke by, the younger guys in the office, and especially by Harp, who doesn't really seem to care that much about him. So he's kind of, in his mind, putting these two losers together. And then we get to our first bank robbery by the group that are going to come to be known as the ex-presidents.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are the ex-presidents, and we need just a few moments of your time. We've been screwing you for years, so a few more seconds shouldn't matter, now should it? Your money's insured, so it's not worth dying for. How you doing, Dick?
Just implementing our own personal plan of deregulation, Mr. President.
So we find out Pappas has this theory about them, that they're surfers. We find out that they are really tight and professional. They've robbed 27 banks in 3 years. They never spend more than 90 seconds in the bank. They never go into the vault. They only take the cash drawers. They don't hurt anybody. They always use a stolen car, which they ditch somewhere. And Pappas has this idea that they are surfers.
Yeah, mad! Good and mad! Yeah! What do you want to do about it? Feels good, doesn't it? Like you're still alive, right? Yeah! Well, since you're still alive and you're not in the box just yet, why don't you tell me this theory of yours and we'll go get these guys?
Okay, hot shot. You want to nail the bank robbers and be a big hero?
Definitely.
Definitely. Then here it is. The ex-presidents are surfers.
Because of some sand and wax and stuff that was found, and then Johnny Utah kind of adds in the fact that they seem to be kind of following the surf. They only operate in the summer. They're gone in October. They're getting money to live the surfer lifestyle, and so they decide that Johnny Utah is going to have to take surfing lessons. So we go through this thing where he latches onto this girl, Tyler, played by Lori Petty. Lori Petty probably best known through her career for her role as Kit in A League of Their Own, also Tank Girl, Free Willy, Poetic Justice, none of which she's done at this point. This is her second feature. She had a small role in a film called Cadillac Man the year before, Robin Williams' film. So she's pretty much an unknown here. So we meet her, and we find out that Johnny is willing to basically do whatever, lie to her to get close to her so that he could get close to this tight-knit surfer community.
Folks, right? But 2 years ago, they were killed in a car wreck. You can't imagine it. Your whole life changes. And I suddenly realized that all my goals had been their goals, and I hadn't been living my own life. So
we meet her maybe ex-boyfriend, Bohdi, played by Patrick Swayze, and now we have kind of the main love triangle here. Patrick Swayze, obviously well known for Dirty Dancing, coming right off Ghost going into this film. You know, his early films included The Outsiders, Red Dawn, Youngblood. He really lit it up in Dirty Dancing in 1987. So he's kind of probably the biggest star in this movie at this point, and obviously someone that we lost way, way too early. But you have this love triangle going on, and it's weird because you have this kind of platonic romance going on between Bohdi and Johnny, and it's structured very much like a typical, you know, romance between these two guys, where they meet each other and they're kind of testing each other out. They're kind of, you know, flirting with each other almost platonically. It's not a sexual thing, but it's just kind of a bromance thing. And Tyler is kind of in the middle of this. She's, you know, got a connection to Bohdi, but she's falling for Johnny. It's a really interesting kind of situation. So he's taking surfing lessons. He's getting close to Bohdi and his group of people. He still has not targeted them. Obviously, the boss doesn't really have anything good to say about this. McGinley is playing like the typical 80s yelling boss. Somebody who you know would never get away with today, when he is just continually screaming at Angelo and Johnny, and Johnny is, you know, more than happy to give it back to him.
2 weeks, you two have produced exactly squat! During which time, the ex-presidents have robbed 2 more banks! Does either one of you have anything even remotely interesting to tell me?
Caught my first tube this morning, sir.
We see there's this little fight between him and this other group of surfers who include Warchild, who's played by Vincent Klin, who is a professional surfer, Chris Peterson, and stunt casting of Anthony Kiedis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers as Tone. So Bohdi comes and rescues Johnny from that 3-on-1 situation, and they kind of grow tight. There's like a campfire scene, and you start to get this feeling of who Bohdi is.
You gotta be willing to pay the ultimate price. It's not tragic to die doing what you love.
That's how I want to go. Hell, I ain't gonna live to see
And
30.
he's got kind of this Buddhist philosophy, this spiritual side of him, and which follows with his surfer character, but it's not really pointing him out as being like a bank robber. And so Johnny and Angelo are kind of focused on these other 3 guys, on, you know, Warchild and Bunker and Tone, as maybe they're the situation. So they call in this raid on their house, which turns out that it screws up a drug bust by the DEA or something. We have a very early Tom Sizemore in here, who's not really super well known at this point. Johnny figures out that maybe it is Bohdi and his gang, because they're packing up, and he saw Bohdi like walking into a bank and hanging out, like he was casing the place out.
It's over. They load it in Bodie's truck and they take it to a public storage unit. And I lost them after that, but the house is empty. They're definitely out of here.
Why didn't you call me? They're probably halfway to Maui.
No. They've got to pick up some traveling money.
And so they stake out the bank, and we have our second bank robbery, which, even though 2 FBI agents are outside the bank, they get distracted by a couple of apparently very delicious meatball sandwiches.
It's time for lunch.
Angelo, it's 10:30.
Right around that corner, there is a sandwich shop. They sell meatball sandwiches. Best I've ever tasted. Would you go get me 2?
And so we have this second bank robbery. We have the car chase. Johnny kind of reveals himself to Bohdi, and this is really great. It's a car chase, and then it's a foot chase. It's actually really well done. Katheryn Bigelow is a excellent action director. So she does this really great job with the chase, with Bohdi running in, you know, full Ronald Reagan costume, and they wind up in the Los Angeles River, a very popular area for filming movies in Los Angeles. They wind up in the river bed, and for those of you who don't know, the Los Angeles River is an artificial river, which is, well, now it's an artificial river. It's just basically a concrete basin. You know, if you think about Greece, think about Terminator 2. It's funny because Terminator 2 is filming at the same time, and they're using a section of the Los Angeles River for the motorcycle truck chase. Point Break is filming. They're doing this foot chase. But anyway, Johnny jumps off the bank, blows out his knee, which is, injured from an old football injury. Bohdi gets away, but there's this big staring moment where it's kind of like, all right, I know who you are. Okay, I know who you are. And Bohdi runs away. So now the gang's around another campfire, and they're, the guys are trying to convince Bohdi that it's time to go. And Bohdi wants to pull out another job because this isn't just about the money. This is about them making a statement. It's them against the system. And he decides he's going to neutralize Johnny by outing him to Tyler, which he does. So there's a scene with Tyler and Johnny where she makes Johnny, at gunpoint, she makes Johnny confess that he lied to her about his parents.
I'll bet you lied about your parents. You just tell me the truth, Johnny. Did your parents die in a car accident? Did they?
They live in Columbus, Ohio. I work bank robbery. The guys I'm after are surfing.
Bohdi shows up at, I guess it's Tyler's house. Bohdi shows up, takes Johnny, still pretending that he doesn't know who Johnny is. Johnny is still pretending that he doesn't know who Bohdi is. They wind up going to the airport to go skydiving. It's kind of weird. I mean, it's a great sequence. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, ostensibly, it's for Bohdi to get Johnny somewhere where he could tell her that they have Tyler as a hostage, and to give Rosie time to get Tyler as a hostage, I guess. I mean, in the structure of the story, it makes sense because it's going to show you that Bohdi's a great skydiver and that Johnny is kind of a natural at it because he's never done it before. But they get on the plane, and there's kind of this bit about they keep swapping the parachutes around. Johnny's kind of like, who packed my chute? They do this like kind of 3-card Monty with the parachutes, and you're wondering if like this is the gig where they're going to give Johnny a bad parachute and just throw him out of a plane.
Who packed my chute?
I did what? You don't trust me?
You gotta earn trust.
Okay, we'll earn it together. Here, take mine. Hey, Johnny, I don't think this is such a good idea. They only open about half the time. Less. Why don't you take young grommets here? How'd that be?
Nah, you don't want this one, man. This one's set for a neck breaker. You're probably better off.
But then you wind up with this really great skydiving scene, which is actually these guys skydiving. As I said before, Swayze wouldn't stop jumping out of planes. He absolutely loved it. And, the sequence takes a couple of minutes. A free fall from that altitude is like when people skydive from a plane like that, like they're in free fall for like 30 seconds. But they do this whole speed star thing, and everybody seems to be liking Johnny. I mean, I guess they're getting lost in the moment, but then they land and they take Johnny into this van, and they show him this video where Rosie has Tyler, and that they're going to go do one more bank robbery, and Johnny's going to come with them. And if he doesn't, meet Rosie at 3:00 in the designated spot that he's supposed to meet her, that he's just going to kill Tyler. And he sells it pretty good that he's actually going to do it. So they go and they do this bank robbery, and it's funny because Bohdi is like almost like gearing Johnny up to do it, talking about don't be afraid, don't fear, because that'll cause you to hesitate, and that's how people get hurt.
See, it's basic dog psychology. If you scare them and get them peeing down their leg, they submit. Yet if you project weakness, you draw aggression. That's how people get hurt. You see, fear causes hesitation, and hesitation will cause your worst fears to come true. So it's simple. You project strength to avoid conflict.
And then Johnny, we have probably the most unintentionally funny scene in the movie, or line in the movie, where Johnny's like, I can't do this. I'm an FBI agent. It's so over the top and ridiculous.
Sure you can. Who knows? You might like it. It's a killer rush.
Bohdi, this is your wake-up call, man. I am an FBI agent.
I know, man. Isn't it wild?
But Bohdi's very nonplussed by that. They go in, they do the robbery. Johnny doesn't get a mask, so he's got to go in with his whole face. And they go in and they do this robbery, but this time Bohdi decides we're going to take the vault.
4 minutes of your lives and we're gone.
Dick, go to the vault. You, Miss Jennings. Would you be a dear and open the gate for my associate now?
Mr. Duggan's got the keys.
Why are we going to the vault? We never go to the vault. Just do it, Lyndon.
He's breaking his pattern. Even the guys are like, why are we doing this?
You're blowing it, man. You're breaking your own rules. You're pulling too much time.
Jimmy, how we doing?
65. What's happening?
There's this undercover cop in there. He tries to take them down. They kill him. They shoot some other people. And they go and escape, and they leave Johnny there, who gets arrested, I guess, for some reason for participating in the bank robbery. It doesn't seem like that would actually happen since he was undercover. Pappas lets him go, and then the two of them go to chase these guys. And now we're heading into the last, act of the movie. So we get to the airport, and the guys and the surfer guys are loading up the plane. They're obviously getting ready to get out of town. And, Johnny comes up. All the pretenses are off now. There's a shootout. Angelo is killed by Roach, but Roach is also injured. Gromit gets killed. They get on the plane. They get flying. And you have this second side dive sequence where Bohdi basically pushes Roach out of the plane, even though Roach is injured. Johnny had said to Bohdi that, the ride's over, and Bohdi disagrees with him.
So listen, Johnny, we are in kind of a hurry. What do you need? You got to tell me where she is.
Oh, and let my policy expire. Good idea.
Look, Bohdi, man, people are dead. The ride is over.
Oh, no. I say when it's over.
The guy you killed was an off-duty cop.
And Bohdi goes on this thing about how I know what it's like to lose. This feels like acid in your mouth. It's really a great little speech.
I know it's hard for you, Johnny. I know you want me so bad it's like acid in your mouth. But not this time.
But they have the skydive sequence, and, they push Roach out of the plane. Bohdi jumps out of the plane. Johnny, without a parachute, jumps after him. So I did a little bit of research on this. This is, while it's technically possible, it's not very likely. It is definitely possible for a guy to, jump out of a plane, another guy to jump out of the plane, and then that second guy to catch up to the first guy. That's definitely possible. It's definitely possible for a parachute to carry two people. Tandem jumps happen all the time if you have the right kind of parachute, which we don't know if Bohdi has. The big problem, apparently, though, is not so much catching the guy and holding onto him. It's staying held onto him when the chute opens. Because when that chute opens, you get like a 2G pull. They had talked about it before, that, a neck breaker. And just holding on with the force of your arms is probably going to be very difficult. But let's just say it happened. They get to the ground. Rosie shows up. They let Tyler go. Bohdi rides off. Tyler's okay. And that's that. So we cut quick to this coda where you see Johnny walking down a path. It's raining. It's in Bells Beach in Torquay, Australia. And somebody tells him the waves are crazy. Nobody can surf out there. But he looks down the beach and he sees Bohdi standing there, walks in behind him, throws the Ronald Reagan mask at him, and starts to tell him about how he's been following him around the world.
I've been to every city in Mexico. Came across an unclaimed piece of meat in Baja. Turned out to be Rosie. Guess you picked a night fight with somebody better. Found a passport of yours in Sumatra. Missed you by about a week in Fiji. But I knew you wouldn't miss a 50-year storm, Bohdi. Yeah.
So the two of these guys get in a fight. It's a big fight in the water. Bohdi almost kills Johnny, but lets up at the last moment, only to find out that Johnny has handcuffed him. And so he freaks out because he doesn't want to go.
You go quietly. No! You know there's no way I can handle a cage, man. I don't care. You gotta go down. It's gotta be that way.
And Johnny does this whole "you're going down, man" thing. But Bohdi talks him into letting him ride one last wave, and Johnny lets him go, knowing that, you know, Bohdi would rather be killed riding the wave than be taken in. And so Johnny just walks away, and the other cops are like, "Oh, we'll get him when he comes in." And Johnny, of course, says,
We'll get him when he comes back in. He's not coming back.
And that brings us to the end of Point Break. So, how do we do? Didn't do too bad. This movie opened a week after Terminator 2. I think it was like in third place that weekend. But on an $8.5 million budget, it did $24 million on opening weekend and wound up with $83.5 million total, 43 domestic, 40 overseas. It's got a 70% on Rotten Tomato. The audience score is like 79. It did 58 on Metacritic. It's got a B+ on CineScore. So audiences are kind of mid about it, but it's all, mid to positive. Roger Ebert, 3.5 stars. He said, and I thought this was cool, talking about Bigelow, he says that she is interested in the ways her characters live dangerously for philosophical reasons. They aren't men of action, but men of thought who choose action as a way of expressing their beliefs. And I think that's cool. We talked about, at the beginning how Johnny is a control freak and he looks to surfing as a way to tame the ocean. Whereas Bohdi, we talked about Bohdi, where it's just kind of like this philosophy of his that it's them against the system and this is the way that they have to do things. So it's not so much that they're just adrenaline junkies. It's that action is a means to a larger goal for them, which I think is something that later movies, including the absolutely awful sequel, fail to get. That sequel is like, these guys are just adrenaline junkies and they're not looking into the deeper thought behind the reasons that Johnny and Bohdi are doing the things that they're doing. So I made a little joke at the beginning about how this could have been the Fast and Furious because it's got the same plot, and that is absolutely intentional. The writers of Fast and Furious, of the Fast and the Furious, which is the first movie, Rob Cohen and Neil Moritz, they were intentionally trying to remake Point Break with cars. That's the film that they were trying to make. They had the idea of doing underground street racing because of an article that they had read, but they love Point Break, so they said, well, let's just make Point Break, but let's make it with street racers. And so that's exactly what they wound up doing. And it's way, way better than the sequel. Sorry, than the remake. There was no sequel. There were rumors floating around that there was going to be a sequel, and it was going to be Johnny years later. It was maybe going to be Bohdi had a son that nobody knew about. There's a thing that was going around like in the early 2000s, I think, called Point Break Live. It was a touring theater company, and what they would do is they would have they would select people out of the audience by a vote. People would come up out of the audience. It was like a participatory theater. People would come up and out of the audience. They would read lines from the movie. The rest of the audience would vote on them, and then they would reenact Point Break with that audience member playing the role of Johnny off cue cards, while other actors wound up playing the actual roles in the movie. And supposedly it was really, really popular. A couple members of the cast would show up to watch. Katheryn Bigelow went to go see it. And I think Gary Busey actually came in and played Angelo at least once. So that was probably the most popular spinoff of this whole thing, other than obviously the Fast and Furious movies, which have kind of taken off a life on their own. Peter Ilf was working on a TV series called Point Break Indo, which was supposed to be kind of a follow-up to this, but It never got really past the early development stage, from what I understand. And then obviously we should probably talk about it. There is the 2015 remake with Edgar Ramirez as Bohdi, who now is an eco-terrorist. Luke Bracey as Johnny. His name's not Johnny Utah. It's Johnny Brigham. Utah's his nickname, which is weird. Ray Winstone, Teresa Palmer. So yeah, it's not good. They kind of miss the whole point. Both, I think, in who these characters are, but also in the relationship that Bohdi and Johnny have, and how the plot develops, how the story develops with these guys. So anyway, so that's Point Break. Thank you for listening. We're going to try to get one more out for the end of the year. My tradition is to do my short tradition is to do a film from the year that's going out. In this case is 1979. So we'll be doing a 1979 film. It may drop at the first week of January. I don't know. There's a lot coming on with the holidays. But thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time. Vaya con Dios, amigo.